Good afternoon, and welcome to the Michigan Department of Civil Rights' virtual fair housing session on home buying. Today's session is entitled Home Buying Transactions, Know Your Rights and Responsibilities Under Fair Housing Law. This session will be recorded, and we will provide copies of the materials used today. My name is Tyra Khan, and I'm the Director of the Michigan Department of Civil Rights' Disability Rights and Compliance Division, and I'm also the appointed State ADA Coordinator for the state of Michigan. I will be your monitor this afternoon. Please note, MDCR will host another virtual session on April 22nd from 6 to 8 p.m., and we will provide additional information about that later session at the close of this meeting today. As you may know, from November 2023 through April 2024, MDCR held a series of fair housing hearings around our state. We received more than 8 hours of testimony from experts, service providers, and people with lived experience regarding the barriers to fair housing. In June of 2024, we hosted a statewide summit on fair housing. During the summit, MDCR facilitated discussions around that testimony that was gleaned from the hearings, as well as offering fair housing related information from a variety of presenters. We closed the summit with a series of recommendations for promoting fair housing in Michigan. The conference summary, including those recommendations, is available on our website at michigan.gov/MDCR. Just look for the Fair Housing Initiative link in the Issues section. Some of the recommendations were related to requests for more training and outreach on fair housing protections. Today's session, as well as the session for April, are in response to those requests. Again, both sessions will be recorded, and we will upload them to our YouTube channel at MI Civil Rights. Please take a moment to confirm that you have the most recent Zoom updates to your device in order to ensure optimal viewing. We will be screen sharing and using the hide non-video participant and spotlight function today to allow better focus on presenters and interpreters. We will also be using the Q&A function for questions today, so please submit your questions in that area, and you can do so at any time throughout the presentation. We will be getting to questions at the end of the presentation. And finally, just let us know if you need any technical assistance by typing into the Q&A function, or you may contact the Zoom Help Center directly. We have a dynamic panel of presenters who will discuss the critical of importance of understanding and complying with fair housing laws, as well as recognizing and addressing bias in home buying transactions. This session will provide information pertaining to your rights and responsibilities when purchasing or selling a home. So without further ado, we're going to jump right into today's topic. Our first presenter comes to us from the Michigan Department of Civil Rights. We're joined by Alana M. Buford-Kamerman, who is the acting director of our Office of Legal Affairs. She obtained her bachelor's degree with honors in anthropology and political science from Bard College at Simmons Rock in 2012. Alana graduated magna cum laude from Michigan State University College of Law and passed the bar in 2016. Before becoming a civil servant, Alana was a distinguished civil litigator in both state and federal courts. She joined the state of Michigan in April 2021 as a staff attorney here at MDCR, where she advised enforcement teams on cases as they progressed through the investigation process. She also conciliated resolutions among parties and prosecuted cases in the administrative process on behalf of the department. Please welcome Alana as she shares information on fair housing laws. Alana, you now have the platform.
This is Alana speaking. Thank you, Tyra, for that warm introduction. I greatly appreciate it. And good afternoon to everybody joining us. Thank you so much for your time and attention today. I will jump right in to the presentation, and specifically, it's about civil rights enforcement, right? What does MDCR do, and what laws does MDCR enforce? So next slide, please. Now, it wouldn't be a presentation by a lawyer if there was not a legal disclaimer at the beginning, right? So please note that the information provided here today does not and is not intended to constitute legal advice for any particular situation. All of the information, content, and materials used today are for general information and educational purposes only, and they are not a determination of any particular individual's legal rights. So, next slide, please. So, to start off, let's first introduce ourselves to the Michigan Department of Civil Rights, MDCR. Next slide. So, first, to know about MDCR, you have to know about the Michigan Civil Rights Commission. The Michigan Civil Rights Commission is an 8-member commission that was established by the 1963 State of Michigan Constitution. The commission was tasked with securing equal protections of civil rights for all individuals within the state of Michigan. The members of the commission are appointed by the governor, who are then later confirmed by the state Senate. The Michigan Department of Civil Rights, which is affectionately known as MDCR, was created to be the operational arm of the commission, which means MDCR is tasked with the day-to-day operations, such as enforcement, education, and community engagement. Next slide, please. MDCR's mission, in turn, is to serve the individuals of Michigan, and we do so in the role of a law enforcement agency, right? To one, secure the equal protection of civil rights for all individuals. Two, investigate allegations of unlawful discrimination. Three, resolve complaints of unlawful discrimination. Four, promote voluntary compliance with civil rights laws, such as hosting webinars for others to learn more about the laws, as well as five, doing outreach and education on civil rights issues. So, next slide, please. Let's dive then into what does it look like when civil rights laws are enforced, right? What is civil rights law enforcement? So, next slide. So at MDCR, there are multiple divisions, and the largest of those divisions is the Enforcement Division, which handles certified complaints at all stages. Excuse me, of intake, which is when an individual who believes they have experienced discrimination brings their allegations to the department for review, investigation, resolution, and prosecution of unlawful civil rights violations. Now, please note, MDCR is a law enforcement agency. The department does not advocate nor defend any party involved in an enforcement proceeding. The department is an objective, neutral fact finder and can resolve cases independent of an individual claimant or a person who's alleging civil rights violations at the end of the day. You know, just like your county prosecutors can enter into plea agreements with potential offenders. So, next slide, please. Now, when it comes to housing discrimination is based on any of the protected categories that's prohibited by law. So specifically, if there's a particular issue or adverse action that a person believes they have experienced. Oh, I see the interpreter went off spotlight. Okay, interpreter spotlighted again. Apologies. All right. So when it comes to housing discrimination is based on any of the protected categories prohibited by law, which means a person has to allege not only was I subjected to this harmful discriminatory act, they also have to allege I was subjected to this act because of my protected class status. So we will go into what are some of those bad acts that respondents are prohibited from doing. And then two, what are those protected class statuses that have to relate to those bad acts? Next slide, please. So in terms of issues, housing issues that are protected or investigated and enforced by the department include eviction, refusal to rent, failure to accommodate disability, advertising, sexual and other discriminatory harassment, other terms and conditions, refusal to sell, redlining, or steering, and failure to loan. Next slide, please. When it comes to the fair housing laws, Title 8 in particular, the federal counterpart to our state laws, respondents are prohibited from instituting those adverse actions, or also known as those bad acts, on the following protected bases: race, color, religion, national origin, sex, familial status, disability, and gender identity. And then for an individual to they have to bring a complaint under the federal laws within 365 days. And I want to make a note here. I think I forgot a slide because these are just the federal housing issues. When it comes to state complaints, the department does enforce two state laws. The first is the Elliott-Larsen Civil Rights Act, and the second is the Persons with Disabilities Civil Rights Act. Under the Elliott-Larsen Civil Rights Act, protections are offered additionally in the areas of one moment here while I pull up the law. In the areas of we have familial status, marital status, disability. So apologies for that missing slide. I will make sure it is updated before the materials are sent out to you. I know where it's at. And I just want
Alana, this is Val speaking. I think the state housing slide is the next one, at least in the presentation that I have from my email. It goes from the federal fair housing to the state fair housing.
Oh, thank you, Val,
You're
for
welcome.
mentioning that. Because I was thinking, oh no, did my slides get out of order? Um, and that's what happens when we have presentations on Mondays. So when it comes to our state protections, going through the list in my head because I can visualize it, state laws protect on the basis of religion, race, color, national origin, sex, which is inclusive of sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression, disability, age, marital status, height, weight, and familial status when it comes to the area of housing. Now, you're probably thinking, well, why are we talking about federal laws when we're a state agency? And that's because MDCR has federal work share agreements with some federal agencies, one of those being HUD. In our work share agreement with HUD, HUD has designated MDCR as a Fair Housing Assistance Program agency, which is also known as a FAP, FHAP. And through that work share agreement, MDCR is authorized to investigate in the shoes of HUD for any violations of the federal laws that MDCR is authorized to investigate. When it comes to the state laws, though, we do like to note in the presentations that there are just a couple of nuanced differences that individuals should be aware of, specifically when it comes to the timeliness of filing complaints or filing certified complaints. As you see on the slide here, for those federal housing laws, the timeliness is 365 days, which is to say that from the date an individual believes they experience discrimination, they have 1 full year to bring those federal complaints to the department. Under the state statutes, though, by contrast, it's half that time. So under the state law, individuals will only have 180 days in order to file their certified complaints with the department. So, next slide, please. Yep, there, there they are. I usually do state before federal law, so I apologize for that little mix up there. So with that, the state housing law protections, specifically under the Elliott-Larsen Civil Rights Act, include race, color, religion, national origin, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity and gender expression, familial status, disability, marital status, age, and as of Wednesday this week, there will be a new protected basis called source of income, which Valerie Barkley will take over. So be on the lookout for that in a moment. So let's briefly go over enforcement process, because I know I took up a little time looking for my slides. So next slide, please. All right, next slide. What does it look like when a complaint comes to MDCR? What kind of experience can you anticipate having? So we're going to go over that in brief detail here with you all. So MDCR's role during an investigation, as stated before, right? MDCR is a law enforcement agency, which means MDCR investigates complaints in order to determine if unlawful discrimination occurred. MDCR is an objective, neutral fact finder and is impartial. So that means MDCR does not advocate, represent, or defend any party during the course of the investigation. Rather, MDCR is acting on behalf of the state of Michigan, right? It's not for any individual person or any individual business or entity. It is for the state of Michigan, the people of the state of Michigan. Now, note too, if an individual chooses to come to MDCR, they still have the right to go take their complaints to court, right? They can still file a lawsuit. The state laws do not prohibit an individual or require that they complete the administrative process before proceeding to court. So do note, though, that if an individual chooses as such, then they would, their case with MDCR would administratively close, primarily because any decision that the courts issue, MDCR would also be bound by. So we don't duplicate that legal proceeding, right? So next slide, please. Oh, and I see the interpreter is off screen. All right, Tori is on. All right, thank you. So when it comes to the investigation process, what a party can anticipate experiencing is that one, each side is going to have the opportunity to present their side of the story. The claimant, the person who believes that they were discriminated against, and the respondent, the individual alleged to have being the discriminator, will each have the opportunity to tell their side of the story, present legal defenses, present evidence, meet with the investigator, and have a full experience of due process. Now, investigations, especially in the housing area, can include site visits, interviews, and an analysis of documents. At times, too, MDCR can schedule conferences with both parties to explore resolution options. Maybe it's trainings, maybe it's donations to charitable institutions, maybe it's moving somebody to another unit. The sky is the limit when it comes to potentially resolving a case. Now, note, right, MDCR is a very, very big advocate, if it's an advocate for anything, is trying to resolve cases between parties in order to get respondents in compliance and allowing claimants to feel whole. But of course, if no settlement is reached, then the department will continue to process that case in accordance with its policies and procedures. Next slide, please. So if a case reaches the end of investigation, there are two possible outcomes. One is dismissal, which means that there was insufficient evidence to support a charge of discrimination or that there's no probable cause. And in that case, the department staff will hold an exit interview with the claimant, discussing that rationale as to why the case will be dismissed. And at that point, if the claimant disagrees with the department's decision, may ask for reconsideration of that decision. By contrast, if there is enough evidence to show a discrimination violation, then the case will move into what's called conciliation, where the respondent is invited to a conference with an MDCR staff attorney, and encouraged to take action to address the alleged discrimination and prevent it from happening again. So it would be at this juncture where essentially MDCR is talking what can be akin to plea agreements, right? What we would call consent agreements within our department in order to resolve the case. The department definitely prefers claimant be a party to a settlement agreement, but that is not required for a case to resolve at conciliation. Next slide, please. At conciliation, there are two possible outcomes. As stated before, one, resolution, which is preferred where all the parties, the department, the claimant, and respondent enter into a settlement agreement, or alternatively, if respondents willing to address all of the public interest concerns raised in the complaint, could reach a consent agreement. But if there is no agreement reached at all during conciliation, then the case would move into what's called a charge, which is where MDCR will issue a formal charge of discrimination. This is what's going to look more like your complaints filed in like a circuit court or a court pleading, where the department outlines these facts occurred and these facts were a violation of the civil rights laws. Therefore, we're prosecuting the respondent for its bad actions. Next slide, please. So that is when the case will move into what's called a hearing. And so the hearing is what you're most likely akin to a trial. And this is where an administrative law judge will conduct a hearing where testimony is taken, documents are presented as evidence, and all of the rules of evidence apply. Both parties are there, the department's there putting on its case. A respondent will have the opportunity to present its side of the case, their own evidence, their own witnesses. And after hearing all of this evidence, the administrative law judge, also known as an ALJ, will issue a proposed decision concluding whether discrimination did take place, or if not, why not. Additionally, the ALJ will propose potential remedies or penalties that they think are applicable. But note that the administrative law judge is only issuing a recommendation. And that is because the final say in any case handled by the department lies with the Civil Rights Commission, which will review the proposed decision and say either they agree and they affirm with the ALJ's proposed recommendation, or may have a different take and may issue a different opinion. At the conclusion of that, if a claimant or respondent disagrees with the commission's final order, then either party has the right to appeal and may do so within 30 days of receiving the final order from the commission. Now, again, just as a reminder, note that filing a certified complaint with the Department of Civil Rights does not prevent any individual from taking their case to court. Again, a claimant always has that right to do so and is not prevented from doing so just because they haven't exhausted the administrative remedies available to them. So with that, that is the conclusion of my presentation. Apologies for the momentary technical difficulties and getting a little tripped up there. But with that, I will turn it back over to Tyra.
This is Tyra speaking. Thank you, Alana. Thank you so much for that informative and educational discussion on MDCR processes. It's so crucial to be aware of the laws that protect against discrimination so that we can ensure that everyone has a fair shake at such important aspects of life like home buying. Just a reminder to the audience, please continue to post your questions in the Q&A box. We will read all questions at the end of the program, so please feel free to continue to do that. As we continue to focus on fair housing protections, we're going to move into that new area of protection that Alana mentioned earlier under Michigan law, which is source of income. For that, we have MDCR staff attorney Valerie Barkley joining us. She will share her insight on this topic. Valerie is responsible for advising MDCR's housing team and a general enforcement team in her work with our department. She uses she, her, and hers pronouns and identifies as a heterosexual cisgender woman. Prior to joining MDCR's Office of Legal Affairs in 2021, Val was a civil rights investigator for over 5 years. She's also worked for the state of Michigan since 2006 in several departments and in varying positions, including corrections officer, parole officer, and children's protective service investigator. All of these roles have given her a well-grounded background and unique perspective to do the work that she's doing now. Val is an alum of Madonna University and the University of Toledo College of Law. Valerie, we're so glad to have you join us today, and we're very eager to learn about your presentation, so I turn it over to you.
Hello, everyone. This is Val speaking. Thank you, Tyra, for that introduction. And thanks, everyone, for being here today. We really appreciate your presence and wanting to learn more and to get involved in fair housing rights and just knowing what rights and responsibilities are out there. So, as everyone has said, we are going to talk briefly about the source of income protection, which is being added and taking effect to our state civil rights laws as of this Wednesday, April 2nd, 2025. So next slide, please. And so the purpose today is to just kind of give you an overview of what this upcoming change means, to define what source of income protections are, who's covered, what it applies to. And it's very important because there's a lot of misconception and misunderstanding in this area. As we'll get through this presentation, I need to make it very, very clear that this really does not apply to the home buying process. So you may be sitting there scratching your head like, well, then why are we talking about it if it doesn't apply to the home buying process? But it's because there's a lot of questions and there's a lot of buzz going on right now about whether it will apply to credit scores or lending and things of that nature. And this area is only going to pertain to rentals. And so we're just going to do a brief overview so everyone has the same information as we move into these new changes. Next slide, please. Okay, so what is source of income discrimination according to the ALCRA? So you're not going to find the actual definition of source of income in our statute. Instead, it's going to point you to a different act, the Landlord and Tenant Relationships Act. And as you'll see on the screen here, source of income is defined pretty broadly, and it includes a variety of different things that it has to do with, your benefits, your subsidy programs, housing choice vouchers, your Section 8, veterans benefits, different Social Security, payments, things of that nature, things that could come in from state, local, nonprofit entities. Next slide, please. And so the same applies to the definition for what is not included in source of income when we're talking about income as a whole. And that's going to be where, the income is derived from something that is potentially illegal or things that are not an ongoing basis. So like a one-time, emergency grant or payment is not going to qualify as an income stream when calculating whether or not a tenant or a prospective tenant has, the ability to afford the unit that they're trying to rent. Next slide, please. Also, what is not source of income discrimination is not assistance that would not be approved by the appropriate agency. So a lot of like housing choice vouchers and subsidies require that there be, this approval process, an application approval process, inspection of the unit, and all of these things have to occur within a certain time frame. And so if this does not meet the time frame, then the source of income is not going to be able to be included. So these are just very limited exceptions, but they are accepted. So next slide, please. And so what are covered? I know I kind of went over that a little bit, but to give you a little bit better breakdown, housing choice vouchers are the HCV program. This is where Section 8 is. Section 8 in Michigan, there's over 28,000 families that use Section 8 and receive some type of benefit from that program. Public retirement benefits, various veterans benefits. Next slide, please. And like I said before, Social Security, SSDI, things of that nature. Federal, state, local government assistance programs. You could have, different charitable programs and nonprofits that, have some sort of grant program or funding source that pays some type of subsidy or some type of grant monies, on an ongoing basis. Again, not a one-time payment. Next slide, please. So what types of housing are covered? So this is going to be rentals, anything that is going to qualify as a residence. So it could be home, it could be apartment, could be boarding houses, mobile homes, single or multifamily dwellings. We've even seen like RV parks that, qualify under housing. Could potentially even be a boathouse. I mean, housing where you sleep at night and where you're applying to rent, a unit for residential purposes. That's the type of housing that's covered. And then also low income housing tax credit properties, as you'll see kind of towards the bottom of the slide, the LIHTC properties, those are still included. Those actually are required to accept subsidies and things of that nature. So next slide, please. All right, so who are the parties covered by SOI? And I think I've already talked about this, and I'm just going to go through it quickly, but current and prospective tenants. So people that are applying for rentals and people that are already within a rental whose situation may change, or perhaps, your source of income or your subsidy, had not been included previously as income. Now it is, there's a variety of different ways the subsidy or your financials could change in life. And so if it applies to both your current and prospective tenants. Other people that are going to have to abide by this change in the law are going to be property managers, rental agents, your real estate agents, and brokers. Next slide, please. And just to kind of dive a little deeper quickly into what a landlord or, landlords could include not only just your basic private landlord, but I mean, as an individual, but it could be the owner of the property, a person leasing the property, a person who's currently under lease, who's then subleasing the property, partnerships, corporations. A variety of legal entities exist that offer residential rental units. And then again, owners of the LIHTC properties, they actually have to certify annually that they will accept vouchers. And so they've been adhering to this requirement and need to continue doing so. Next slide, please. And there are some limited exceptions to this rule. Landlords that have less than 5 rental properties or units are going to be exempt from having to accept vouchers, subsidies, and all of the other areas or source of income that we've discussed. So one thing that I know we'll be looking at is whether a landlord or owner or corporation has multiple related entities. That if there are multiple entities and between adding up all of the different entities, there are more than 5 properties within all of those related entities, then the exemption will not apply. So for any of if there's a landlord that wants to put 1 or 2 properties in their name and then create an LLC for a different property, and then, have co-ownership with another individual of a couple other properties. And so if we add up all of these related entities and we get to 5 or more, that person's not going to be exempt and is going to have to abide by the source of income protections. Next slide, please. And the other exceptions are for squatters, people who are living illegally in a residential unit without the landlord's consent or without paying any types of rent. So those persons are not going to be able to make any types of complaints indicating that their source of income, has somehow been violated. And then emergency rental assistance, as we talked about previously, this emergency rental assistance usually is on like a one-time basis, or, just like here's a payment for this particular month or something. It's not an ongoing funding stream. So something like that, where it's emergency kind of a one-time deal, is not going to be inclusive in source of income protection. Now, if there's some type of emergency rental assistance out there that is an ongoing basis, then that would apply. Next slide, please. Some things to kind of keep an eye out for, where source of income may kind of bring itself to the surface would be requiring additional references for persons that have a subsidy or voucher of some sort, imposing additional or unreasonable screening criteria, larger deposits, increasing the fees, or not calculating the deposit or not deposit, I'm sorry, not calculating the voucher or the subsidy as the total income or part of the income. So there's a variety of different things to look for. Asking somebody to move units, that's maybe a current tenant, asking them to move to a less favorable unit, something along those lines. Next slide, please. And that is it for me. So I'm going to hand it back over to Tyra. Thank you so much.
This is Tyra speaking. Thank you, Valerie, for sharing your knowledge about this new area of the law in Michigan. I'm sure that our viewers will have some follow-up questions on this topic as we move along. Just a reminder that this session is being recorded. It will be made available on our YouTube channel at a later date, as well as we will provide copies of the PowerPoint presentation that are being used today. Just wanted to remind everyone of that. Next, we're going to share some examples of fair housing cases that our department has investigated. We're very fortunate to have with us Lashia Sharp, who is a civil rights manager within MDCR's housing unit. Lashia was born and raised in Detroit, Michigan. She's a graduate of Wayne State University and holds a bachelor's degree in political science with a minor in communications. She's also a graduate of the Academy of Court Reporting with a post-baccalaureate certification as a paralegal. Currently, Lashia is a graduate student at the University of Miami. Lashia has worked in state government for 19 years and diligently serves the public in all facets of her life. Lashia, thank you so much for being with us today. You have the platform.
Thank you, Tyra. This is Lashia speaking, and some examples of fair housing cases that the Michigan Department of Civil Rights has investigated includes cases where actual testing has occurred. Usually, one of the fair housing centers here in Michigan has sent in participants to participate in testing. The parties will present similar information, and maybe the only difference between the two will be their protected class. Sometimes it's their race, their national origin. Some may present to be visibly disabled and others may not. Usually, they have spoken to the exact same person, and sometimes they have received completely different information. Some have been told or alleged to have been told that the property is no longer available. Some have been put on a waiting list when others have been taken right away as a potential applicant for the property. In some of those cases, we find that it usually ends for us in some sort of resolution that includes training, because we want everyone to be able to participate in the finding a place to live or purchasing a home or being able to live where they choose to live without being told steering information based on bias. So lots of cases that we get do come in with actual testing that has occurred. Other cases that we've investigated include allegations of discriminatory appraisals. We had a recent case where the claimant believed that their appraisal paperwork was not completed timely because of their race. Now, the investigation showed that the appraisal paperwork was not completed timely. That was correct. However, none of the appraisals that occurred on that day were presented or completed timely, as they normally would due to a medical circumstance that the appraisal had. So every allegation is just that, it's an allegation. And as long as it meets our requirements, we can investigate. It doesn't mean that we advocate or believe that everything that has been presented to us is a fact, but we do our due diligence in investigating to determine whether or not unlawful discrimination has occurred. Other cases that we've received, some that I've investigated myself as an investigator, include allegations of unlawful discrimination in mortgage lending cases. There have been many times when I've investigated cases where a claimant has made allegations to the Michigan Department of Civil Rights alleging that they've been denied a mortgage based on their race or other protected classes. Now, this situation is one that there's actual proof you can find to see if others who on paper are similar to the claimant have been approved for such mortgage lending opportunities that were granted those. And the only difference in some of those cases were the protected class. I personally have seen where parties have presented to be similar in credit score, similar in income, and one party was denied and the other was granted a mortgage. And the only difference in some of those cases was the race or the protected class. So we've seen all types of cases. No case is exactly the same, but we do our due diligence. And luckily, in mortgage cases, we have the HMDA data that will help us to see who the party has lended to, what they look like on paper compared to the claimant that we have, and what action did the respondent take in those cases. And HMDA is the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act, and that data is specifically designed to uphold the integrity of the mortgage lending process. So we're able to get that information, look at it to find out if in fact the respondent has shown bias or unlawfully discriminated against a party based on a protected class, especially when the parties have presented to be very, very similar on paper. And those are just some examples of the types of cases that we've investigated. And I thank you for your time. Back to you, Tyra.
This is Tyra speaking. Thank you, Lashia, for that enlightening information about the fair housing cases that we have seen with MDCR. Just a reminder, please continue to submit your questions on this topic and any of the others that we've already heard from in the Q&A box, and we will answer as many questions as possible at the end of the presentation. Our next presenter will address implicit bias in the decision-making process and how awareness of unconscious preferences can help prevent unintended discriminatory practices and outcomes. We will be joined by Alfredo Hernandez Corson, who is the director of MDCR's Development, Innovation, and Access Division. Alfredo was born and raised in Panama. He moved to the United States in 1990 and joined the U.S. Army at the age of 20. He spent 5 years stationed in Honolulu, Hawaii, before moving to Illinois in 1997 and then Michigan in 1998. Alfredo obtained his bachelor's degree in liberal studies with a philosophy minor at Grand Valley State University, where his work entitled Language, Culture, Perception, and Knowledge was published in the McNair Scholar Journal. Alfredo pursued his graduate studies at Western Michigan University, where he earned a master's degree in comparative religion. He was also selected as the McNair Scholar and the Thurgood Marshall Fellowship recipient. Alfredo has worked for numerous years developing innovative and inclusive strategies for organizational change. He's also taught college courses in philosophy and cultural anthropology and currently serves as a State of Michigan Equity and Inclusion Officer in addition to his role at MDCR. Alfredo, we're delighted to have you with us today, and we look forward to hearing your presentation. The platform is yours.
Thank you, Tara, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to be a part of the discussion this afternoon. Today, I would like to talk a little bit about implicit bias and how it impacts the decision-making process. I believe it is always useful to gain a deeper understanding and awareness in terms of how implicit bias, also known as unconscious preference, may influence discriminatory practices. It is important to think about how equal access is impacted by biases and how they also impact client relationships and housing decisions in real estate. I will briefly discuss best practices to help mitigate personal and interpersonal biases and assist also in the prevention of discriminatory practices that impact the decision making. We know that implicit bias can affect fair housing in several ways. For example, a lender may unknowingly provide a better loan or better loan terms to borrowers from certain neighborhoods. We know implicit biases can also influence how housing professionals market and advertise their properties potentially excluding certain groups from the housing market. We also know that research has shown that implicit bias can have severe consequences for fair housing outcomes, leading to disparities in housing access and quality, as well as perpetuating social and economic inequality. As we begin to explore the topic of implicit bias, I believe that it is important to provide a foundational definition. For the purposes of this presentation, I'll define implicit bias as the attitudes or stereotypes that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner. When we explore the roots of implicit bias, we have to recognize the role that culture and societal messages play at shaping how we experience our experiences. It is vital to understand how implicit bias impacts us, the work we do, and the people we serve. Most people will admit they have biases, yet not everyone who acknowledge their own biases does the work to mitigate them. We recognize that acknowledging biases is an important part of the process. We also understand that the next and very important step is to engage in the work of mitigating biases. Otherwise, we don't move forward. This means that we begin to identify what those biases are. What are the messages that I have internalized? How have they shaped me? What is the impact that they're having? And as we begin this exploration, we begin to effectively mitigate those biases. As we explore implicit bias in deeper ways, let us remember that as a society, we all embrace principles of justice and fairness. At the very least, explicitly, most of us do. Yet at times, especially when we're tired, stressed, busy, distracted, we may experience a disconnect between our conscious values and principles and our unconscious biases. For that reason, it is important that we work to understand the difference between our conscious values and unconscious biases. Part of the work of understanding the practice of discrimination today is that as a society, we don't tolerate explicit racism, sexism, and other discriminatory practices. That's not to say that explicit discrimination does not exist, but simply that as a society, we know it is against the law to discriminate based on certain protected classifications. Yet discrimination on these bases does exist, and it is not only in the space of explicit discrimination. So we need to remember that research on implicit bias reminds us that discrimination today often takes place at an unconscious level. So as we just briefly, for the purposes of this presentation, explore implicit bias, there are three root causes that shape implicit biases, right? The first one is, as human beings, we are predisposed to form us and them based on the most trivial categories, right? We form in and out groups. This does not mean that we're bad people or that we only want to share time with people we like or anything as such. Is that as humans, we have learned we gravitate towards comfort, and this is deeply rooted in survival instincts. So this in and out group predisposition is deeply rooted in a survival instinct. We're also impacted by polarizing messages. Those messages are repetitive, and they come to us through the media, many venues, and we receive those messages. They are repetitive, and they're impacting how we see ourselves and how we see others. And we also have a brain that follows cognitive scripts, right? And our brain sometimes goes on autopilot when we're tired, when we're stressed, when we're distracted. Our brain is following those cognitive scripts to preserve energy. And at the same time, it is definitely impacting our decision making. So it is important for us to recognize that there are at least three main contributors, three root causes that shape those unconscious preferences. It's not an indicator who is a good person, who is a bad person. It's an indicator. There are indicators that we're all humans, and that we're impacted by the predisposition to form us and them, that we are impacted by polarizing messages, and that we're impacted by the fact that our brain follows cognitive scripts. The more we understand this, the more we are able to interrupt those the unintended consequences of unconscious biases. So when we think about barriers to equal access that are shaped by biases, which can impact client relationships and housing decisions in real estate, we understand that there's ample data that points to the problem or problems, right? For instance, there's a lot of research, but for instance, a 2023 Fair Housing Trends report from the National Fair Housing Alliance recorded about 33,000 complaints of housing discrimination in 2022, more than in any other previous year in the last 25 years since the organization began tracking this incidents. More than 53% of the complaints were discrimination based on disability. 17% were race related, and 7.5% were gender based. We recognize that a lot of discrimination in the real estate sales market can be very subtle and many times undetectable. A lot of consumers often may not ever known that they have been treated differently. Discrimination, we recognize, can be hard to identify. At times, service provider will work with the consumer in some sort of superficial fashion, which does not lead to positive outcomes. At times, that provider may refuse to sell to or otherwise deal with an interested buyer, which includes perhaps not returning calls or ignoring making firm sales offers. A home buyer should understand when someone is being steered away from a particular location and even certain kinds of loans because maybe they fall under one of the protected classes. This can affect which neighborhoods they're shown homes in or result in being offered more expensive or riskier mortgages. As a consumer, you always want to educate yourself when you go out into the marketplace to engage in a commercial transaction and learn what your rights are as a consumer. You can always approach your local fair housing agency, and it's been stated before, if you believe you've been the victim of discrimination, you can also reach out to the Michigan Department of Civil Rights. I recognize that when we think about biases and disparities generated by implicit biases, that sometimes we feel a little bit hopeless about the situation. Yet there are resources available to home buyers as well as folks in the real estate industry. In terms of mitigating biases, the good news is that they're malleable and they can be unlearned. Of course, the work involves the construction of new mental associations as well as the practice of breaking a habit, which requires intention, attention, and time. It is important for, let's say, real estate agents to establish protocols, to continue to establish them, and to override and reduce bias. This could be done, for example, when meeting or speaking to a new client or customer. Think of a positive moment from your life and learn how to manage your unconscious preferences so that your interpersonal interactions with clients are successful. Always ask for and listen to and abide by the person's preferences. Allow every person to make his or her choices for community and location, independently of whatever it is, features of a house or apartment, price, and or financial options. In the end, we all have a social responsibility to be a part of the solution. As a consumer, again, please know the resources available to you, know your right, including your rights to file a discrimination complaint. if you feel you have been the victim of discrimination. As a service provider, continue to do the work to understand the laws that protect your agency as well as the consumer, and continue the work of mitigating biases at a personal and interpersonal level. Thank you very much for providing the platform to share a bit about this information, and I'm here to answer any questions later on.
This is Tyra speaking. Thank you, Alfredo, for breaking down some of those causes of implicit bias and then how we can mitigate them, begin mitigating them. In the context of homeownership, implicit bias can have a significant and harmful ramification. So your presentation offered a lot of insight into how implicit bias can affect real estate transactions. Our last speaker will provide an overview of the Michigan State Housing Development Authority, or MSHDA's, home ownership program, and will share a description of those requirements. Please welcome Eric Dusenberry, a business development account manager within MSHDA. Eric has been in his current role with MSHDA's homeownership division since January of 2009. His work covers Southeast Michigan. Eric has over 35 years of experience in the mortgage industry, including positions dealing with the analysis and implementation of new mortgage products. Eric has an in-depth knowledge of the mortgage industry, including affordable lending products and the real estate market in Southeast Michigan. Eric, thank you for being with us today. We're very excited to hear about what MSHDA has to offer home ownership. Those interested in home ownership under this program, the platform is yours.
Thank you very much, Tyra. I do appreciate it. So we'll be reviewing some of the programs that MSHDA has. On the next slide, it'll kind of give you kind of some insight of what we'll be talking about today. So if you could go to the next slide, we'll go ahead and get started. So some of the buyer opportunities that we have through MSHDA's homeownership division, mostly it usually starts out with housing education and the providers that we have. I'll touch on that. Our overarching program is the My Home Loan. It's only 30-year fixed rate mortgages on that, and it encompasses FHA, conventional loan products, VA, and RD loans. With those things, we do have down payment assistance available. We'll touch on that. Some new programs are a rate relief program, the first generation down payment assistance, the mortgage credit certificate. And we've also opened up the ability to stack our DPA with other grants that might be out there to increase buying power. So the next slide kind of goes over the fact that we have a housing education program providers out there. We have a statewide network of 30 agencies. They do a lot of things for homebuyer education that's required with down payment assistance, but they also have financial literacy, pre-purchase housing counseling, and fair housing education. So we rely on and lean on our housing education program providers out there throughout the state to make sure people are ready to buy a house. The next slide, we'll go over some of the things about the My Home Loan program. As I said, we have an overarching program that's all 30-year fixed rate. We sell bonds to finance our mortgage products. So many times our rates are very competitive in the market where rates have gone up a lot over the last several years. Ours have been pretty steady and very competitive. And you can also put that down payment assistance on top of those conventional FHA and RD loans. We have throughout the state an extensive network of participating lenders. When we wrap up with the slides here, we'll kind of indicate how you can contact some of those lenders. And we're not just for first-time home buyers either. There's many areas of the state. In fact, most of the state is targeted by MSHDA where you do not have to be a first-time home buyer. The next slide will go over the loan types. As I mentioned before, under the My Home Loan program, you can do conventional financing, FHA, VA, and RD. RD is through the USDA. That's a federal program. One of the interesting things with our conventional product is that the mortgage insurance that is offered with the MSHDA conventional loan is lower. Since we're a state HFA, the rates are lower, indicating that the payments will be lower for people that use MSHDA financing. One of the misconceptions out there too with MSHDA is you can come to MISTA and do conventional financing without down payment assistance. So if you have a down payment of 10% or 20%, many people are coming to us just for a conventional loan with 10 or 20% down, which is fine. The next slide will show our interest rates currently. They do move from time to time. These are today's rates, but our 30-year fixed is at 6%. And if down payment assistance is taken on a loan, it's a little bit higher at 6 5/8. And again, these are very competitive rates in the market today. The next slide, we'll go over the 10K DPA. So $10,000 is available statewide. It's an interest-free loan with no monthly payments, so no interest is accrued on that, and there are no monthly payments. And that can go towards a down payment, closing costs, and prepaids, which are your typical escrow expenses. The minimum borrower cash investment is 1% of the sales price. And if down payment assistance is taken, again, as I mentioned, homebuyer education is required. One of these things with the 10K DPA, it's not a gift or a grant. MISTA is self-funded. As I mentioned before, we sell those municipal bonds. We put those funds into our mortgage programs. This is not a gift, so it gets repaid when they sell the house or refinance. And again, we kind of funnel that money right back out to the next borrower who might be coming into MISTA with that $10,000, and it's available statewide. The next slide will show a new program that we have. So it's called the Rate Relief Program. We've partnered with the Federal Home Loan Bank of Indianapolis, where they purchased a specific MISTA bond to offer favorable interest rates for people that have below 80% of adjusted median income or less. You can see the rates there. They start at 4 3/4 without down payment assistance. With down payment assistance, a little bit higher at 5 3/8. So again, these programs are offered by Federal Home Loan Bank members that happen to be a MISTA lender. The income limits are just a little bit lower than our standard program, but the rates are very good. They're extremely competitive. This is kind of being run as a pilot program right now. There are still funds available, and it's been well received out there, and the funds have been moving rather quickly out the door due to the rates. The participating lenders, again, have to be Federal Home Loan Bank member banks that are MISTA participating lenders. And they follow the standard program guidelines too that we have for the My Home Loan requirements. Basically, we have income limits, purchase price limits that come into play on any of the MISTA programs. The next slide will show another new program that we have. Again, it's going to be a pilot program for first-generation home buyers. So if you think along the lines of a first-time home buyer, if you think about, younger people, they can be older people too, but if their parents have not owned a home in the last 3 years, we've put $25,000 together for down payment, closing costs, and prepaids for this first generation program. As I mentioned before, the parents of the buyers should not have had an ownership interest in the previous 3 years. If that's the case and they meet our normal My Home Loan requirements, again, $25,000 would be available for those folks that qualify for this program. One of the differences between this program and others is we require face-to-face homebuyer education. That can be done virtually if it is face-to-face by any HUD-approved counseling agency. And again, all the MISTA homebuyer education agencies can do that. And again, the borrowers do have to meet all the other MISTA eligibility requirements. The real estate community lenders have been very, eagerly anticipating this product, and funds are moving rather quickly out the door with this. The next slide will also show another program that we have. If you could flip to the next slide, we have a federal tax credit that's available as well. So many people aren't aware of this program, but there is a federal tax credit that's available for purchases. These cannot be put on a MSHDA loan, so it would be a loan outside of MSHDA, and they would follow our income and purchase price limits. And the tax credit is based on the annual mortgage interest on an annual basis, and 20% of that number can be taken as a federal tax credit against their year-end federal tax liability. So again, from realtor's perspective, these programs are available and out there for consumers to take advantage of. This one is a little bit more complicated because it does deal with taxes. And of course, we refer consumers to their tax professionals to get specific information on how that might apply to individuals who might be purchasing with this product. The next slide basically just lets you know that for lenders, so for realtors that may not be using MSHDA much, to find a MSHDA lender, you can Google MSHDA experienced lenders or loan officers. And we do provide a county locator that shows where loan officers are located with their contact information. The next slide, I think we'll just roll into questions. And I think probably with the overall presentations that have existed, that the questions will be wrapped up with everybody else when everything is finalized. So thank you very much. I do appreciate it. Tyra, you can take it back.
This is Tyra speaking. Thank you, Eric, and thank you for sharing the details of MSHDA's home ownership programs. They sound wonderful, and I know you encourage attendees to reach out to your office for more information, and we also encourage everyone to share this information with your family and friends. So that brings us to the end of the presentations. We thank all of our wonderful presenters, and now we're going to move on to the last area of our session today, which is questions from our audience, our attendees. For the remaining time, Vicki Levengood, our communications director, will read as many questions as we can get to and direct those questions to the appropriate presenter. Please feel free to continue posting your questions in the Q&A function as long as we're on screen. Vicki, will you please move forward with reading the first question?
This is Ryan speaking. I'm going to be stepping in for Vicki doing the questions here. So the first question that I have, I believe will be, we're going to probably direct that towards either Valerie or Alana. But in the chat here, I have, can tenants schedule legal counsel meetings with MDCR or affiliates in other states? And is there an appointment portal available online?
This is Alana speaking. So I can take that question, Ryan. So the first question, can tenants schedule a legal counsel meeting with MDCR? No, right. As I stated during my presentation, MDCR is a law enforcement agency. There's no representation or advice giving during the process. But what MDCR can do is, of course, give you resources and referrals information on how to contact potential advocacy groups that could assist you in that regards, or help you in obtaining legal representation for yourself. But that's not something you can obtain from MDCR. The second part of that question, or affiliates in other states. So when an individual does contact MDCR, if something is not within MDCR's jurisdiction, we do try to pride ourselves on providing good customer service. And if a referral can be made, MDCR does do that through additional letters and documentation. And then finally, is there an appointment portal available online? I will say not yet, though. Emphasis on the yet. MDCR is working on a public portal, and I know that's in development, and hopefully it will be unveiled sooner rather than later. So please stay tuned.
Thank you for that, Alana. I have one more question that's probably going to be directed towards that same group. And that is, does MDCR handle landlords that aren't known to keep their properties up very well, kind of poorly maintained? And if that manager is not located in the jurisdiction the property is located, let's say there's multiple jurisdictions, municipalities, how does MDCR handle those cases? And is there a legal point of contact for multiple jurisdiction cases?
This is Alana speaking again. I am going to allow Val, not allow, I think it'd be best for Val and Lashia to kind of tag team that question. So I'm going to hand the baton over to them.
Thank you. This is Valerie speaking. So the first part of the question, how do we handle slumlords and landlords that don't maintain properties? I guess I would say it has to relate back to a protected reason. So if one of your protected reasons is you believe that the landlord is not providing maintenance or something to your property because of one of the protected classes, because of your race, because of your religion, because of your familial status, any of the things that we protect in our statute, it has to relate back to one of those reasons for us to have any type of investigation involvement. If it doesn't relate back to a protected class, then most likely your issue is not going to fall within our jurisdiction, and we would probably refer you to the State Bar of Michigan or something along those lines to consult with maybe a landlord-tenant attorney that handles, those types of controversies. So the second question, if the property manager is not located in the jurisdiction. So, oftentimes we deal with anywhere from small local landlords to large corporate landlords that operate multiple housing facilities throughout the state and sometimes in other states. And so, if a landlord's doing business within the state of Michigan and, offering properties for rent in the state of Michigan, we have the ability, we're a statewide service. So we have the ability to locate them and, investigate as far as that goes. Hopefully that answers the question. If there are multiple jurisdictions, how does NDCR handle those? And is there a legal point of contact? So again, I think, sometimes we're dealing with people that have a variety of properties. Some can be, we have some that have portfolios that look like multifamily housing units, apartment units, but then also have some single family type dwellings or some duplexes. And they're all kind of incorporated under, like one particular LLC. I mean, we have the ability to investigate, those types of situations. We do a lot of different searches online to try to figure out, who owns a property, who manages a property. We use Lara Business Entity Search quite a bit to, ascertain who actually owns properties so that we can obtain, answers to our complaints. Hopefully that addresses your issue.
Thank you. This question I have, the next one is going to be for Alfredo from Development, Innovation, and Access. So Alfredo, what are some training or resources that can help real estate professionals become more culturally competent and inclusive in their work?
Yes, thank you for that question. We provide a number of training solutions in the department. We have training on cultural competency. We also have a 1-year program that conducts pre and post assessments of cultural competency. We measure, monitor, and evaluate the growth at an organizational level as well as an individual. We also have implicit bias 1.0, 2.0. We have additional training related to cultural awareness, cultural competency, if you will. And just, at a basic level, some of the strategies to mitigate bias include cultivating awareness of one's own bias, developing cross-group interaction, friendships. There is the implicit association test. It's available online. Also expanding our educational curricula, as well as counter stereotypic training. So for any additional information regarding resources or training, please reach out. I believe our email and information will be available. Thank you.
I have one more question here for you, Alfredo, while we're on the topic. What are the social and economic consequences of discriminatory and biased housing practices, specifically home buying?
That's a pretty big question. Social and what type of, can you repeat the question?
Yeah. What are the social and economic consequences of discriminatory and biased housing practices, specifically home buying?
Yeah, well, I would say social and economic, the social and economic impact of discrimination goes across the board. It's not exclusive to home buying or renting a home. It's just very broad. The experience of being rejected based on a particular uh, based on how we may be viewed or associated with a particular group or by polarized messaging, etc., impacts people. There's a lot of research that points to the fact that the experience of rejection, uh, feeling discrimination, uh, that experience in the brain it occupies the same spot as when we experience pain, physical pain. So the experience of rejection or being discriminated against has that level of social impact. In terms of the economic impact, social and psychological. In terms of the economic impact, there's lots of research that points to the business case for diversity, right? We know that there's innovation, creativity, broader perspectives that reside in diversity. And when we don't think about it, when we set it aside, when we embrace the notion that we're all the same, we're generally preserving the status quo. We're generally preserving marginalization. And this is where cultural competency really comes into play, right? So that we understand that embracing what we have in common, it's important, but it can't really come at the cost of setting differences aside, because it comes with a high cost that has a social, psychological, and economic impact.
Thank you, Alfredo. Appreciate that. This is Ryan speaking again. My next question is for Eric Dusenbury from Mishta. So Eric, does Mishta seems to have great homeownership programs out there for home buyers and homeowners. Do the requirements for the programs deter people from applying for these programs? If so, what are some of the roadblocks for applicants and what are the solutions to the roadblocks?
Yeah, so it could be a deterrent, but I think one of the things to kind of think about is most people many times with Mishta don't think about applying with them because they think it's for extremely low income people. Whereas, our income limits are 120% of adjusted median income. Our purchase price limits have been somewhat low for the last 10 years and are set to go up hopefully in May to almost double. So, I think probably the deterrents are more perception than reality as far as people applying for Mishta. So I hopefully that answered your question. I think most of it is an educational type thing because many people may not look to Mishta for a standard conventional loan where many people might qualify for it. And if there's a lower rate or a better product out there like Mishta, many times it's overlooked. Hopefully that answered the question.
Thank you. This is Ryan speaking again. I do have one follow-up question to that, Eric. If someone is looking for more in-depth information regarding the requirements of Mishta's programs, where can they go for resources and or assistance?
Yeah, so that's a good question. The best place to go for information on Mishta products would be to the Mishta lenders. So if, again, you can Google Mishta experienced lenders, a list will come up of loan officers and institutions that are trained to provide information on the Mishta programs and requirements. So pre-qualifications and things along those lines.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Going back to Alana, Val, or Lashea for this question, how should discrimination in real estate be reported, and who is responsible for holding individuals or organizations accountable for compliance?
Hi, this is Val speaking, and my video is disabled. So you're just going to hear my voice. But yes, we can, if there's a complaint of discrimination, certainly get in contact with our department. We can take online complaints. You can call us. We have the ability to take in-person complaints at any of our office locations, but primarily at our Detroit office. We have a big service center and lots of conference space to be able to sit down and meet with potential claimants to discuss, what the issue may be and, provide direction, whether the complaint is jurisdictional for us or if a referral needs to be made elsewhere. I think Alana had presented earlier about, some of the requirements. And so certainly, our statutory requirements require that the data harm be within the last 180 days. So you have 180 days, about 6 months, to make your complaint. So as long as it's one of the protected reasons and it's a harm that we cover, then certainly I would encourage anybody with a complaint to bring that to us so that we can conduct an investigation. And then I'm not sure, could you repeat the second part of the question?
Yeah, sorry about that.
Okay.
Who is responsible for holding individuals and or organizations accountable for compliance?
So this is Alana speaking. I can take that question, Val. So in regards to holding parties accountable for compliance, the first manner or mechanism the department has available, especially if the parties have entered into a settlement agreement, is that that settlement agreement will have those terms and conditions that the respondent is supposed to comply with there. And from that settlement agreement, if it is breached by a respondent for not, let's say, doing the trainings or maybe giving back pay or, returning rent or something of that effect, the department can seek court enforcement for the breach of the contract, i.e. that settlement agreement. So that's one mechanism of ensuring compliance. Additionally, of course, we have our proactive methods as well. So educational opportunities, trainings, um, community outreach that's also put on by the department. And if alternatively, let's say we do have a case and there's no agreement between the parties or maybe agreement between the respondent and the department, those are the instances where the department will prosecute the case, right? And that's where that administrative law judge will issue its recommended order. And then the commission will issue its final order. And under the statutes of Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act and the Persons with Disabilities Civil Rights Act, the Civil Rights Commission is granted authority to issue fines or require trainings or maybe posting of notices, things of that nature. And if that final order from the commission is violated, again, the department can seek court enforcement to ensure that a respondent is compliant with the terms of that order.
Thank you so much for that. This is Ryan speaking again. That wraps up all the questions, so I'll turn it back over to Tyra to wrap up.
This is Tyra speaking. Thank you, Ryan. So as we close, I would just like to thank all of our panelists for sharing your time and expertise with us today. Your information and insight have been invaluable for all of us to learn more about our rights to fair housing in the home buying realm. Thank you to all of the MDCR staff working behind the scenes to make this session possible, as well as our accommodation providers for making this an accessible event. And finally, we thank all of you, our participants and those who live streamed, for joining us today to learn more about our rights in this important topic. Just a reminder to please join us on April 22nd, 2025 from 6 to 8 p.m. for our second virtual session on fair housing law with respect to rental transactions. The virtual session is free, but registration is required. The flyer and more information will be available on MDCR social media platforms as soon as we end this session. We hope to see you in April. And again, the session was recorded. We'll make the slides available as well as the recording. Thank you for joining us and take care.